Hello again, and thank you for joining me for the Noble Father podcast. I am your host, Theophilus Zhuang, and today is January the 15th, 2024. And very delighted to have you with us. This start to this year has been an incredible one. And I just want to start off by saying, if this is your first time listening to the Noble Father podcast, we are a community as well. And so if you're a father that's looking to go deeper and to be more intentional with your use of social media, we have a community that is now fully premium only. And it's a membership that is inclusive of your development, accountability, meetups, weekly meetups. We have a Bible study on Mondays and just a regular meetup on Thursdays. And we meet over Discord. Discord is an app that we use, and that forms the basis of our community. And the membership can be found on the link listed on the video, patreon.com/noblefather, no spaces. And yes, if you're tuning into this audio, know that on the Noble Father YouTube channel, you can see the video version of this podcast episode as well. And very delighted to have you with us. It's been an incredible journey on this podcast, really. To celebrate the little things. We've gone from purely doing audio versions to doing video versions, to upgrading audio equipment to do this better, upgrading the video quality as well, to provide a wonderful listening and viewing experience. I wanted to first start out by saying that you may hear some ambient noise in the background. Currently, right now in Vancouver, we are frozen over. There isn't snow on the ground. And actually, I will show you if you are on the video, and maybe this will encourage more to watch the video. This is the view that I get to look at. So you see a little coyote in the back there. And those mountains there, that's Golden Ears. And so I have the fireplace running, which is why you probably hear that in the background. If you can't see, yeah, it's running back there, just to stay warm and cozy for myself. And so I wanted to give three very important shout outs. And these are three people that have constantly given me encouragement on this journey. And it's amazing. I'm so grateful to have these men in my life who constantly show their support, and almost as if they can't wait to talk to me about my most recent releases. And I'm going to say their names because I very much value them and who they are. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to Phil Debrief. Phil Debrief is the father of one of our associate pastors at our church. And man, it's amazing. We pull into the parking lot. He does helps us do the parking lot ministry at our church. And there's always a big smile on his face. And there's always this anticipation of wanting to say something about the podcast episode. And he, is so willing to open up and give me feedback on it and what are his thoughts on it. And we shared a very good conversation on Saturday. He was talking about his own father and his grandfather as well. And just it was reassuring to hear that feedback from somebody else. And it also encourages me to want to have more conversations with fathers and people out there who have these stories that need to come out and get onto the air, because not many people may relate with a communism story that my dad, a childhood in communism story, but somebody can still distill that information, or somebody can still feel very grateful for where they're at and what they have in life, or the traumas that they've sustained, not on the same level as my dad. And so having that perspective is one that I very much value. And so it was a wonderful conversation. So Phil Dubroff, thank you very much for supporting me on this journey. Murray McKenzie, thank you for always sharing these podcast episodes out to your friends on Facebook. and that devotion that you put into sharing it is one that is not lost on me, and I very much value what you do for the Noble Father podcast. And the last person I want to thank is Dwayne Gertson, who is the main pastor at my church. And he's a man after God's own heart for sure. And he is definitely a man's man. And the way that he leads our church as a man, the example that he sets for me, it sets the bar really high. And I very much like chasing after high standards. And so everything you do, Dwayne, is I am following and I love, and I'm so glad I get to have you in my life as a leader, as a mentor, and I just want to say thank you to you. Today's episode, I really want to just talk about the episode I did with my father, that interview. There was a lot of emotions going into it, and I just want to debrief it, and I'll that's probably what I'm going to title this, is just a debrief of the conversation. Having that conversation with my dad really brought us both together, brought us closer together. And it's amazing the emotions that come up, right? Because to be honest, I've never really had that conversation with my dad like that ever before. So it was a bit strange because, also because I was playing the podcaster role and I was the interviewer, and I knew some of the context behind my dad's story, but at the same time, I was also very confused by the history of China. I'm born in Canada, and so I know of my Chinese heritage, and I know some of the history, but I don't know all of it. And what's interesting is, you don't know all of it. And even if you did know all of it, you don't understand the context of somebody's upbringing in that time. Like, where was my dad during this part? Or how old was he during this? And every year that is different. It would be different if he was a 10-year-old during the revolution. It would be different if he was 2 years old, during the revolution. So there's very important parts to the story that needed to come out and that I needed to understand. That conversation was a very broad one. It was I felt a very rushed one, a very quick one, because there were so many minute details in there and so many things. Now that I think back on the conversation, there's a lot of questions that went unanswered. So we squeezing it into 3.5 hours. A lot of people were like, "Oh man, 3.5 hours, such a long podcast." 3.5 hours does seem long, but if I were to ask you to fit your dad and your grandfather's life into 3.5 hours, it's actually not a long time. It's actually very, very short. There's so many things to talk about, and there's so many intricate stories and details that need to come out, right? I know, I'm sure if you watched the interview, you would have noticed that there's a lot of information about my mother that came out, and a lot of, okay, because I'm a noble father, but I'm not purely influenced by just my dad. I'm also influenced by my mother, and so there's history there that in conjunction created me. And so you can be curious about my dad's history, but you should also be curious about my mom's history, because that also makes up a part of who I am, and those are important contexts for the conversation. And that's why this whole journey of wanting to time capsule this information is so important, because I don't just want my son and my daughter to get the information from my dad. My daughter is going to be a mother one day. I hope is going to be a mother one day. And the information that even my wife would have to share would absolutely benefit her. But at the same time, the information that my mother, my daughter's grandmother, has information that would help her as a mother, as a grandmother, potentially as a great grandmother one day. And if I truly want the best for my children, I would do anything. I would do everything in my power to be able to improve their future, to improve the brightness of their future, let's just say. As parents, raising children is one of those things where you have to set a high bar. You have to be very consistent, right? If you reprimand your child for one thing and then later on they do it again, and you witness it and you do nothing about it, you've been inconsistent. And so it sends very mixed messages to our children. So we need to be very consistent in our messaging. That conversation has spurred tons of conversations with others, and you know, upon release, one of the guys who very much helped me in my own personal development journey, early on, it was like talking about and embodying who I was and who God created me to be. He ran a space that was, for freestyling, it was for talking about stuff, and it was just sharing and being yourself and dropping the mask. And man, he reached out to me, and dude, he was just like so fired up, and he was so emotional about the whole experience. And he said he'd only listened to 10 minutes, and he was already kind of like feeling there was something there. And he recently lost his mother, and before she passed, he recorded some stuff, some conversations with her, and some things that she said, and some quotes and stuff, and it really reminded him of the value of the time that we have here with those who are still with us, and especially loved ones. It's so important to seize that moment, to seize that time, and to really capture it. Is there a way to really capture it? And he still has his father, and it spurred in him something of like, I need to go and have these conversations with him, because I'm not willing to let tomorrow go by or today go by and something were to happen. We don't know. Like my friend Dan likes to say, we all have a ticking hourglass above our heads. It's invisible. We don't see it. At any point, you could end up gone. You could be gone forever, or something happens where you can't recall that information. Let's just say it's Alzheimer's. You just forget these things, and where do they go? They just vanish into thin air, and you just lose that opportunity. And I was not willing to do that. One of the things in the story you heard was like, when I was a child, my dad would go on these mission trips, and I would get very, very emotional, get very scared that potentially this is the last time I ever see my dad. And I'm seeing that in my children nowadays too. Yesterday I had to go pick up my brother and his family from the airport, and my kids just didn't want me to go. They were scared, and just a short journey, right? I can only reassure them so much, but then their minds are going to be wanting to go to that place of like, this could be the last time I see daddy. It's always possible. We never know. God can always take me away, and then what, right? Very possible. And so I didn't want to have that. I'm not satisfied with a singular conversation that I had with my dad to drop the context. I very much want to get more out of him, and so I'm looking forward to more conversations with him about the journey and the stuff in between that we didn't really get to talk about. I'm taking a mental note of all the areas and stuff that was missed, and because honestly, I wasn't satisfied with his with the emotions and the thoughts that he had whenever, let's just say, I was born, or the thoughts and emotions that he had when the second, the third, and the fourth child was born. There's so many intricate things in there that feeds into the context of my dad, and obviously of the upbringing that I have. A lot of other things too, of like moving to Venezuela. I was 3 years of age. Like that whole decision, there's so many intricate details and things in there that what made you think like you were ready for that trip? Obviously, if God called you to go, you're not going to pull a Jonah and go somewhere else. And so, the thinking behind going to Venezuela, and then the conversation you would have with my mother about that decision. How did you guys get to that? And were you guys both just kind of on fire and just wanted to go and be somewhere else? I always tell people, the life of a missionary's kid, a missionary family, is not very well off. And so I can't imagine, that the thinking behind that, right? It's a completely different generation. Like it's just, it almost boggles my mind. And those stories in there, is something that my son and my daughter need to hear, because there will be a time in their future where God asks them to do something completely far out of left field, and you have to be obedient. And a story like that would be something that would greatly benefit them. So we have Venezuela, but then we also have times of instances where we spent some time in, Fresno, California, because my dad was doing training, missionary wise. And these are some of my fondest memories. That time in Fresno, I don't think was even a year. Um, we were babysat. I remember we lived very close to the center where my parents had to go do their trainings. The school that I went to there, I remember running home from school and watching Batman the animated series and Cops, the show Cops. I remember going to the grocery store. My grandmother was actually there in Fresno with us for a stint. And the reason I remember that so vividly is because we'd go shopping for groceries, just my brother, myself, and my grandma. And as she is paying for the groceries, me and my brother would run to this giant gumball machine, and we would stand there and we'd wait for her to come and give us like a quarter or whatever it was to get a gumball. And man, those are some of the fondest memories I had with my grandma, which is why I said on the podcast that she was very personal and loving, very, very nurturing. And also formed, and now that I think about that, it formed a disconnect in my mind because I was like, my dad was never hugged as a child, but for whatever reason, and this is something that I see in China nowadays too, is that grandparents show affection to their grandchildren like no other. Like, very loving, hugging, kissing, very, doting upon their grandchildren, almost as if like, we do this here in North America as well, is that we go through life and, teenage years, you don't want anything to do with your parents. And then early adulthood, you want to, prove yourself, you want to be yourself, and you leave the house or whatever. And, you kind of try to be your own person. And you don't care about your parents for a time, let's just say. And then you get to, starting to have relationships with people, and you still kind of distant from your family, and not until you have kids, and then you breach this almost like this turning over point where you step into maturity and you start to grow and develop as a human being, and your mind is almost fully, they say the human mind isn't fully matured until 28. So, are you really an adult until you're 28? So, you get to this point where you suddenly turn over and you value that relationship. You value your parents and you value your grandparents. You value the knowledge that older generation is able to give. And that's the case with grandparents. I feel in China, it's like they suddenly become mature, and I don't know the dynamics of that. Like my grandmother, she was just like, man, she was like embraced us, loved us, kissed us. Like she was so loving of us, and so that time frame in Fresno, and even a little bit into Vancouver, because they did spend some time in Vancouver as well. And I'm trying to make sense of that history and that context. And I'm sure, my dad will listen to this and, think about what that is. And then we circle back and have that conversation. So we had that time in Fresno, Venezuela, in between sparsely, right. My dad talked about the time where we spent a week or something in San Francisco, came back to Vancouver, and we were kind of looking for churches. And, even that is like, I remember me and my dad would go on stage and, at different churches, and my dad would just tell me we have to sing like a Spanish worship song as kind of like a presentation of, because my dad would go up on stage and talk about his experience being a pastor and missionary in Venezuela. And I don't remember how many times we did that. I was reluctant too, but I also I'm the type to really fly by the seat of my pants with my dad. My dad is very much type A. If you've traveled with Miller, this is that he, goes to a place and he's like, hey, we got to meet this person. And then it's like impromptu. And you just have to get up and go and do it. Right. Like, oh, you show up at this place and your dad, my dad would be like, hey, you got to share something. I'm like, what? Like, you're telling me 5 minutes before this meeting, like you're telling me 5 minutes before this event, I have to share something. Like, what do you want me to say? So, maybe that's why I go into flow so easily, is because genuinely and generally, whenever I jump on these podcasts, like I literally just think of I sit still and I pray and I ask God, what do you want me to say? What is the main topic you want me to talk about? And usually I just hit the record and just go. I just fly and I'm able to just talk about it and just share about it, So there's great purpose in that, it was very difficult at the time to know that I'm singing Amazing Grace in Spanish and all of a sudden I'm going to, share about something. And, so going into flow is something that I'm very, it comes very naturally because of that, probably God's orchestration for sure. So, we have that, right? Experiences at church, back here in Vancouver, also settling into a church. I know because at the time my dad was looking for a place to call home. Where did God want my dad to steward? Where was his flock? And, we stumbled upon a church in Richmond called Richmond Chinese Baptist, and we ended up being there for a majority of my childhood. And that was really where I met some of the closest friends I'd ever had, for most of my upbringing, and even into the prodigal son journey, which a lot of these friends are still kind of distant and away from the church, to my dismay. As a pastor's kid, I'm also and I'm not boasting about myself. This is just qualities that I've noticed in myself and others have pointed out in me, is that I'm a very natural leader. And so, people are drawn to myself. And so, in that group of friends, I was a little bit of a leader, and because I didn't know how to reconcile being a pastor's kid, and I had nobody to show me and emulate what that life looked like, I was pretty much meant to fend for myself and figure it out for myself, right? Because my dad grew up without religion or any kind of relationship with God in his life. And so he couldn't walk me, as son of a pastor, through that. Like he didn't know what that was like. And so, very confusing time for myself. And I'm sharing this because, I'm sure my dad's going to be listening to this and he's going to hear about this and then, talk through it. Maybe there's certain things in there that he didn't know because like I said, we've never had these conversations before. And so, the prodigal son journey that I took, whenever I became a young adult, is part of that conversation. Like, what was that like for you, Dad? And so that there's that piece, in there as well. And then when I walked away and was involved in different things and with the wrong people and just the skulking about, the sneaking around, being mischievous and all this stuff, that's all part of the journey. And I think my dad, may not know the full picture of everything. He'll hear me share my testimony here and there, but I'm sure, like I said, there's a lot of details and things that gets missed and lost in translation. So the prodigal son journey. And then we have, this return. Well, we went to United States again. We spent a year down there, and he ended up being a church planting minister, a director out in, the Bay Area. And we were there for a year, and I was at school, it was, about the time where I started going back to school and figuring out what's the next step, considering policing, right? So we have that. And then we ended up coming back after a year. Things just got worse for my brother. And, my sisters were still a little young, needed to finish off high school, and so that journey, and then wanting to quit going to school because, didn't feel like law enforcement was a thing. That was really the fork in the road moment. And so what next, right? Because you don't just, drop school and then, so where do we go? And this is kind of still near the tail end of my prodigal son journey. And my dad was already going to China at this point. And that's where, I was invited to go. And I saw it really as a vacation and just like a little, I was a player. Let's just be real. I was a player, and it was not good, obviously. But a lot of that journey, I don't know how much my dad knows, and I want to know that context of where were you and what was your thinking behind this, and why did you do this? And so my time in China, right, until I got married, until I had Davian, and then we decided to come back. And he's already very heavily invested into the ministry. And then, of course, we have COVID, right? And even just this personal development journey of creating Noble Father and going into digital marketing before that, and entrepreneurship and and now we're here, like finding, a place to call a spiritual home at our church, at Maple Ridge Community Church. And just to see him, what he thinks about my journey as a father, and maybe even lessons, that he, because there's a lot of time through COVID, you just sit down to think about life, and what was that all like, and even as a grandfather, what that journey has been like for him. He's got 5 grandchildren now, right? He's got 2 daughters that still aren't married, and I mean, they're getting close, and there's excitement with that. And a lot of people would look at my dad and say, man, you're so young, you're 65, but you still look young, and you're still so lively. And my dad's got plenty of life to live. I don't know that. I can't unequivocally say that. I can't be absolute about it. But my dad is relatively young and still very lively and still very active and cares very much for his health. And so there's a lot of life still to live. And so, even life as a grandfather, my son is 8 years of age now, right? 10 more years, he's 18. Who knows when he's going to be a dad himself, right? How many more years do I have, right? And so let's just say my son's going to be a dad in 20 years, right? I'll be 57, right? I don't know. My son has already expressed to me that he wants to be a dad himself. I expect the same for my daughter, and she's only 5, so I mean, it's hard to say right now. But my son has expressed that he wants to be a father himself, and he said he wants to be a noble father. And those are words that just, statements that just warm my heart, right? Like, it just makes me so proud, right? Davian's always been a kid of conviction, and when he saw that my friend Alex got baptized, he was fired up. Like, he knew in his spirit that he wanted to do that. Like I shared on the podcast, right? I get close to saying the F word, and my son just like is up in arms about it. He's just very, very convicted. Kind of very much like me growing up. I knew where the line was, and you just don't get close to it. You get close to it, I'm starting to step forward and tell you, don't get close to it, don't touch it. And so he's gonna be a father one day. My daughter's gonna be a mother one day. Like, these conversations, and I'm gonna be a grandfather one day, and that's an entire different journey. There's an entire different mental roller coaster to undertake. That I don't even know right now what that's gonna look like. But that's why these stories and the context behind it is so important, because we're gonna pass that point, and my son one day, he's got a journey to undertake. He hasn't even hit his teenage years yet. He hasn't hit his early adulthood years yet. And we still don't know what that dynamic could look like. Like, even though my parents gave us all the space and the freedom to make our decisions, there was still a lot of relationship that was frayed because of this disconnect, and because of wanting to do it myself, wanting to go and take my inheritance and go out and figure my own stuff out. And that's something that's going to happen. It's inevitable. I think if you don't have a true understanding of darkness, you have no understanding of what light is. And so God, in his perfect orchestrating character and ability of his, allows us to run away, allows us to get lost. But what you'll find is that he will leave the 99 just to pursue the one who was me, or who was you. And I know that's going to happen for my children. And I'm glad I had the model of the parent. My parents, they really let me figure it out, because they knew in their heart, deep faith, that God was there. God was going to take care of it. It wasn't, like I always say, the analogy of me holding on to God's hand and holding on to my children's hand. And one day, as they're growing older and older and older, we're bringing their hands together and slowly put their hands together and releasing and relinquishing that control and giving that relationship to God, and trusting that this little lamb, my precious son and my precious daughter, is in God's hands. And I can control and try to say and do all these things and try to do everything to control them. And this came up in the conversation with, the mother that had her child sex trafficked as well. Of like, you could do everything you want to put them in a cabin in the forest and keep all the dangers away from them, but they're gonna find a way to walk away from you. You have to let it go. You have to just relinquish that control, and just trust your child's hand in God's hand, and step away and walk back and watch God do his thing. And so that's going to happen one day. It's not an easy thing to even think about right now, but it is something that everybody, as a parent, you're going to have to walk through. And I don't know if I'm looking forward to it, right? Like, who's looking forward to that day of rebellion and to, of them taking your inheritance and walking away? It might not happen. I don't know. Dwayne Gertson and his family is a great example. His children are so on fire for God, and they're just an amazing family, right? I can't say enough about the Gertsons. They are something else. Debriefs as well. The kids are amazing, just brilliant, and serving at the church, and like and they take care of my kids, man. I see them playing with them, like fist bumping and hugs and all this stuff. Like they're just brilliant kids. And so maybe it'll never happen. Maybe because being present and trying to be the best that I can and intentional with my children, that they don't go through that. I don't know. And so, trust it, give it up to God. And, I think there's really nothing that can go wrong when God is orchestrating on your behalf. Bible verses that say, children after you, children's children, the generations to come, God will bless, because of your faithfulness and your righteousness. You can find the verse to back that up. But that's really all I wanted to share today. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully 30 minutes isn't too long for you. I'm looking forward to that second conversation. I do want to have more guests on the podcast. I am a little bit, it does get a little tiring to do the monologues and stuff. And so, if you've listened to the father, with a podcast with, my dad and the interview that I had with him, and you think that, you may benefit from a conversation with your own father, or, even just yourself, to get the information you have onto the airwaves for your children one day, I'd very much like to facilitate that conversation with you. And, I already have other conversations with other dads of what was your upbringing like, and how did you get to be where you are today. I'd very much like to facilitate that for you. Again, this is everything I do for work. This is my bread and butter. I love facilitating space for people. I love getting the word out there. I love sharing personal development journeys as a father into the airwaves. This is all I do for work. And so if you're able to subscribe to the Patreon to support, please consider giving there. You can see the link down on the video, or it's patreon.com/noblefather. Also, right, if you're a father and you're looking to get intentional with your growth and development, we are now a premium community over on Discord, and we have audio channels where you can find a father and have a conversation and talk. You can also find text channels where you can write and send messages to one another. And we have meetups. We have the Monday meetups that meet at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, to do Bible study, which is kind of like a life group. We're just talking about life with a faith context. And Thursdays, 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, where we're doing just a regular meetup to talk about life. What was the wins this week? What were the losses this week? What were the lessons that you got? What were the aha moments that you had? It's very, very intentional, very putting the social back into social media, and going deeper than just surface level. I know for myself, I've benefited a lot from those conversations, and we would love to have you there with us. And so thank you for joining me this week. Every Monday I make these releases, and so thank you for tuning in again, and you guys have yourself a wonderful week. Bye for now.